Nice to meet you, and thank you again.
You too.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I'll just your book has been very well received in the world, and therefore even here in Little Penang, we would like to talk to the person behind all those wonderful little stories that we find in How to Pronounce Knife. Very nice. As a curiosity, I speak Swedish, right? And in Swedish, you actually say kniv. You pronounce the K.
Oh.
And maybe you actually do pronounce the K. You say kniv, yeah. But anyway, that's just a curiosity. Well, okay. Ms. Souvankham, I've read your collection of short stories, digesting them slowly and with great fascination. Most of all, I'm awed by at least two things. Firstly, your empathy. I would call it empathy here. You excel in giving sudden salience to passing events or repeated behavior, and releasing the latent emotive content in the characters you so skillfully describe in your stories, and that you have inscribed into their life situation. I admire that method a lot. It shows a strong sense of empathy in you. You are not out to comfort your reader. You are out to bear the battered yet enduring souls of your protagonists, if I put it that way. The reader may forget your story, but they will not forget the sense of worry, of resilience, of suffering, which is left in them after reading your stories. And secondly, you surprise your reader by not taking the more easily assumed paths in your storylines. You do not seek closure in them, and you do not allow your reader to find closure either. How conscious are you in choosing that style of story writing, I wonder?
I am very deliberate in not giving readers any closure. I like to surprise readers. You know, when we see a child at school, the common story would be that a child who goes to school and brings a smelly lunch, that the child would feel ashamed, embarrassed, humiliated, but not this child. She fights back and tells everyone around her that they don't know a good thing, even if it came and sat on their faces. Or, you know, someone who is a boxer who loses his dream of being a champion and then ends up painting nails at a beauty salon. You'd think he'd think himself a failure. That would be the easy route, but actually he's a wonderful success. People line up around the block just to see him paint nails. I never pity any of my characters. If I'm brutal to everybody, and I think that's where the empathy comes from. I never describe feelings. Like, I never say my characters are sad or angry or moved or touched. I make the reader feel that when they read the story. I know that my sadness is not a reader's sadness. We each have our own life experiences, and when we arrive on the page, I require that the reader feels the sadness that I've made, and so I don't use the word sad. I try to create that feeling on the page for the reader.
Oh, that's a wonderful method. It works very well, I would tell you. Well, almost all your stories in How to Pronounce Knife have Lao refugees as the main protagonists. I suppose that is what you know well, that is what is close to you. But what makes your stories memorable is your ability to penetrate, to exaggerate for effect, the new social context in which they live in order to tell the story. The prominent theme is about surviving the refugee condition, I suppose. Do you feel a need to generalize their condition beyond that, to say something, to identify something that is common to refugees and non-refugees alike? Or is the refugee situation your major interest and approach?
Well, every time I encountered stories of immigrants and refugees, it's always, you know, we only hear about them when they've become a tremendous success, like if they've gone to Harvard or became a doctor or a lawyer. But, you know, such other lives that haven't gone that route are just as powerful, like someone working in a chicken processing plant, someone who packs store furniture, someone who works in a nail polish factory. Such a life is just as valuable. I think, you know, yes, these are stories of immigrants and refugees, but I'm also up to much more than that. I'm saying something about language, about life, about work, about family, about love.
Yeah, yeah. I think, for example, in the gas station, that story, the protagonists may not be Lao refugees at all. Yet the reader cannot, because of the context of the book, I suppose, the reader cannot but see their lives as being cases of suffering that can just as well be independent of the refugee situation. Now, given the general context of your stories, however, the reader cannot help wondering if they are Lao refugees. But in the end, I felt anyway, if they may be Lao refugees, they may not be Lao refugees. That does not seem to be the point. So what you're saying actually does work, at least for me, in that specific story.
You're absolutely right. You know, whenever we pick up a book, it isn't often described where that character is from, and it doesn't need to be. And what's lovely about this collection is I play with that. Sometimes I do describe it, and sometimes I don't at all. And then it doesn't really even matter after a while. I assume that everyone knows without me telling that they are refugees.
Your characters do feel very, very much alive. You know, that's the effect I get. You know them practically immediately. I do also feel the female voice very strongly in your stories, naturally. Even when the protagonist, the storyteller, is a boy or a man, as in Manny Paddy, for example. Interestingly, when you write about older people, man or woman, I don't feel that as strongly. What challenges do you feel when you write with the voice of a man, like in The School Bus Driver, for example? Or am I exaggerating this difference? You know, where age is concerned and where man and woman differences are concerned.
I think you've touched on an unusual thing about my short stories, is that when we encounter a woman in a story, it's not the way we often see women. For example, you know, there is a woman who picks worms with her daughter, and she is the best at her job. And she, you know, she insists that this is what she does. There's a little girl who is called Sexy, and instead of feeling scared, she says to the person who calls her Sexy, I'll cut it off. We'll see what's sexy then. You know, women behave in ways that we don't usually get to see them. And same with men, like as you said in The School Bus Driver, he is quiet, submissive. It's his wife who is having an affair with the boss, and he, you know, he's the one suffering in silence. We don't see men, you know, in such a submissive role.
Yeah. There's
I
also go on.
what voice I do find difficult writing is the child's voice,
I see.
because editors have said it's too on the nose. A child can't be this smart, can't think this way. But I think that robs children of their intelligence and their skill of observation.
Mm, mm,
And when I was a child, I thought that I observed that. And, even though our sense of children and what they think, I feel is very narrow, I insist that these are viewed through the voice and observation of a child, and they stand alongside these adult voices.
mm. Well, I tend to think I was very intelligent as a child, and it's been downhill ever since. Even nowadays, when you listen to young children or even my own children talk, they're extremely intelligent, surely. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree that. But of course, in storytelling, you're allowed a certain freedom, right, to exaggerate things if you like. Now, family relations broken by the refugee situation, sometimes by life itself, sometimes that is a theme in some of your stories. Mother-child, father-child ties are also common. What's also prominent are the dissonances involved between the world of the older people, bogged down by cultural memories and pride and the fear of losing them on one side. And on the other, you have the world of the young, seeking to belong and seeking a less disjointed future. The old people in the stories tend to appear more naive in their new world, but the young are cynically realistic. Is this a discourse on your part on the refugee family? In some ways, are these cases symptomatic of a certain giving up, a caving in a new cultural context? Or is it a battle to survive instead?
These are stories about the power of language. When you're an adult and you move to a country where the language that you think in and things in is lost to you, you have to begin all over again. You become very much like a child, and then also as a child, you you're new with language, so it's easy for you in terms of like you haven't lost your 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 sense of language because it's malleable. When you're young, it's something you're always acquiring. Like, for example, a word is not difficult for you to pronounce because you're still learning it as a kid. But when you're an adult, a word can be thought of as being difficult to pronounce because your sense of language, your mouth is used to the language that you move and think in. And this is something that, this loss of language, this power of language, is something that the refugee family knows very well.
Mm-hmm. Which would be one reason the refugee communities tend to get somewhat introverted, I suppose, especially among the older people. There is much to write about in the refugee condition, I'm sure. Will you continue to explore that further, or can we expect you to move into problems of assimilation and cultural integration and cultural forgetting even, and perhaps even happier tales of cultural transitions? The COVID pandemic must be a gold mine for material of that type that you excel in describing.
I want to write whatever I want to write. If I want it to be, if I want to continue making my main characters refugees and immigrants, I will.
Mm.
I don't think a pandemic is, you know, it's not original. It's happened before. So to me, you know, writing about the pandemic is not something I'm interested in right now, maybe because we're so in it. I want to keep, all I want is to keep writing, to think of the word after the word after the word, to break a reader's heart, to make characters that feel alive. And they don't have to be refugees. They could be a mechanic, a grandmother, a next door neighbor. I want to make characters and make them feel real.
Can you, I'll just ask you two more questions, and then I think we'll let you go. Can you share with us how you get your inspiration from? How do ideas, how do stories, how do storylines appear to you? In the writing itself, in observing the communities you live in the world of English literature, or just in anthropological observation of people?
It can be inspiration, I feel, can come from everything and nothing. I heard a woman laughing next door, and I turned that into a story, you know, in Edge of the World. I like worms, and I don't think they're gross or creepy. And I wrote a story about the joy of what it's like to hold a worm in your hand. I'm obsessed with particular words that seem strange to me, like knife, how there's a letter right there in the front. And in the English language, we see that, you know, we all agree that there is a letter there, but we're not going to give it any sound. I'm interested in how words are made and what they feel like. Even a description of like the word thief, how in the English language it looks like a spit that never arrives. I'm obsessed with words, and that itself inspires me. But also what I find, I mean, what I want to do and what I think this book really does in How to Pronounce Knife is that it is written in the English language, but it makes the English language feel foreign. You know, whatever stage of the English language that you forget that you know it for a little bit. You marvel, you criticize, you wonder about the language. But the trick is that I'm doing this in the English language, but I make it feel foreign. And I didn't really notice this until it was translated into the French language. And then, you know, in another language, you have that distance. And then I thought, oh, I'm doing this in the English language. I'm asking for this distance from a reader. And that's something I want to continue doing.
I see. You're known from what I can see, you're known for short story writing and for poems. As a last question to you, which of these formats do you prefer, or how do they express different sides of you, the poem and the short story?
I find it really easy to write a short story. Whereas when I write poetry, it's very difficult to be, you know, one of the things that I do is I work with very simple and direct language. And sometimes when you work so simply, the mechanic of what you do is not thought of, because I hide how technical who I am. And I feel in the short story that technical mechanic is more visible, whereas in poetry, it isn't so visible. Its clarity and simplicity is just taken for simplicity. I don't know, I love both forms. I think of my short fiction as smuggling in poetry, you know.
I understand that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to more stories from you that will break my heart.
I wondered if it would be okay with you if I read from a short story, just so that, you know, some readers can hear what these stories sound like, and to put into context what we've been talking about.
All right. Please.
Okay.
That would be lovely.
This is a scene from Edge of the World, and it touches on what you said about how adults seem like children, and children seem to take on adult responsibilities. Once I started school, my mother watched the soaps alone and told me about them when I came home. There was always an affair, a long-lost twin, someone in a coma, a handsome doctor. After a while, I didn't want to hear about them anymore. I started reading books, and my mother would come sit with me and have me read them to her. She would ask questions about the drawings inside. The books she liked best were the scratch and sniff ones, and the ones where animals popped out at you. Each time I pulled the paper tab and a cat or a dog jumped out, she would draw in her breath, surprised and delighted by such a thing. There was one book about a sheep with a cotton patch inside. My mother would pet the cotton with her finger as if it was alive. At night, she would bring a book to my bed and insist I read it to her. There were not too many words inside. Sometimes she'd fall asleep right away, but when she didn't, I would make up stories for her. No one is ever alone in the world, I said. There is always a friend somewhere for everyone. She must have been 24 then, but she seemed much younger and smaller. I watched over her, and when she shivered, I pulled a blanket up to cover her, trying not to wake her. Sometimes she had nightmares. I could tell by how she was breathing, short, panicked breaths. I would reach out and stroke her hair, tell her things would be all right, though I didn't know if they would be or what it meant to say those words. I just knew it helped to say them. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. I'm sure that was a good foretaste for many of our listeners and that they should go get your book as soon as they can. And well, I for one look forward to reading more from you, either poetry or short stories. I love short stories myself. I find it that an author of short stories is a special kind of person who's able to mine from daily life very, very deep experiences or human experiences. Yeah. I think you do it fantastically well. All the best in your future undertakings. And thank you again for talking to us in Penang.
Thank you for getting up so early and doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope we can meet someday, somewhere.
Yes.
Take care and good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You too.